Hi, everybody. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, heading down the home stretch. The final three meaningless games for the Milwaukee Brewers coming up this weekend. We got bigger things to fry. We got the wild card. We got the division all set up and ready to go. Now we got to find out who we're playing this weekend. So we're going to talk about look ahead, look back, and some interesting moves made by the Milwaukee Brewers. All that coming up, including Jack Stern going to be joining us from BrewCrewBall.com, and we'll talk to him next, coming up on this edition of Locked On Brewers.
You are Locked On Brewers, your daily Milwaukee Brewers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Next week, the wild card round. We'll find out Sunday night who the Brewers play and what the game times will be. We know it's going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week, and they're all going to be at AmFam Field. Hopefully, we don't have to get to Thursday, and we take care of business in the first two games. My name is Chuck Freeman, longtime sports talk show host in the great state of Wisconsin, morning sports anchor, sportscaster. You see me on WTMJ4. And it is great to be here on Locked On Brewers, my first year hosting Locked On Brewers. It's been fun, and I wanted to keep going. We're going to be going, obviously, in the offseason, but we're not ready for the offseason just yet. We're carrying this right through. Following us on Google, Spotify, Apple, all the major downloads get us. And, of course, our growing YouTube audience. Search Locked On Brewers on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and you will get every episode of Locked On Brewers. Become a subscriber on a growing audience of Locked On Brewers. Our guest, Brew Crew Ball's Jack Stern, joining us right now. He's got some good stuff to talk about. Pitching his expertise, and of course, so is the Milwaukee Brewers. Jack, we've had you on before once again. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back. Always enjoy getting the opportunity to talk some Brewers.
Now, last time we talked, I think it was in July. Did you think the Brewers would have this thing clinched? Or I thought maybe we were going to go down to the final couple of games with the Cubs. But I thought it'd be the Brewers and Reds battling it up. I didn't think it would be the Cubs, but nonetheless, the Brewers winning this division going away.
Yeah, I mean, I think up until the trade deadline, I was really thinking it was going to be that two-horse race between the Brewers and the Reds, but that kind of changed after the trade deadline because it was the Cubs who really made a lot of moves to try to better their roster, whereas the Reds didn't really do anything to address the holes that they had in that pitching staff. So they kind of tapered off as we got into the stretch run here. And the Cubs played some really great baseball, too. So then I thought for a while it was going to come down to that last series at AmFam Field for who's going to win the division, Brewers or Cubs. But, now the Cubs have kind of fallen on hard times in the last week or two, and the Brewers have taken advantage of that, done what they need to do. They've played winning baseball, and here they sit as division champs with one more series left to go.
Yeah, and they fought off, never were challenged by the Cardinals. I always thought that they were going to get back in it, even though when they got off to the slow start, never did. Pittsburgh was in first place for like 2 days. The Reds challenged. The Cubs came on strong, but the Brewers earned every bit of this division. Even with times, I was doubting them, but I was like, I think that the winner of this division is going to be like 5 games over the 500 mark. Would have never guessed the Brewers would have got the 20 over.
Yeah, I mean, it sure seemed for a while like this was just going to kind of be a matter of which mediocre team ended up winning the most games, and it seemed like this could be a division that you could win with, 86, 87 wins maybe. But the Brewers have definitely turned it on lately. The Cubs did too, up until that stretch where they kind of fell on hard times. So I think that just kind of an example of this is why you play 162 games. The narrative can change really, really quickly based on one hot streak or one cold streak. So it was really nice to see the Brewers step up the way they did. I'll be honest, I wasn't really expecting it because I think for a good portion of the season, they didn't really play like a team that you would expect to get around that 90-win mark. They had a negative run differential for most of the season before they really got hot over the last few weeks here. So again, I think it's a pleasant surprise for a lot of people with how well things really came together over the last few weeks. I'm sure if you asked some front office members, they would tell you it wasn't a surprise because that was the hope for this team that they were going to end up having a season as good as they did on the whole. But really, the Brewers did what they needed to do. And I think if you're going to get hot, you'd much rather have it be towards the end of the season. That's when you want to be playing your best baseball. And that's what the Brewers have done.
In July, I would have guessed, or even into August, before especially after that Dodgers series, I looked at the Brewers as comparable like to the eighth seed in the NBA playoffs. Teams that's going to get in there and probably get punched out by the number one seed. But they've gone from an eighth seed to me to a legitimate contender of the National League, whereas they're not going to be fodder, I don't think, for the Dodgers if they get that far. Got to get through the wild card, obviously, first. But I really feel so much better about these guys here in recent weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on kind of, what you're looking at and who you ask. I think now, actually, I'm probably one of the people who maybe isn't quite as optimistic as some other people are at this point in time. I think there are just a couple of things behind this hot streak that they've been on, especially on the offensive side, where I'm not completely sold on this team's ability to hit at a good enough level to really sustain that pitching staff. But the one truth that does still remain, and this is something that's been pretty constant for all of these Brewers teams that have been in the playoffs in recent years, is they have really, really good pitching, and that pitching gives them a chance in any shortened series. Is that chance good enough where this is going to finally be the year where things kind of break in their favor a little bit? I don't know. That's just kind of a question that you could chalk up to, it's baseball and anything can happen. I wouldn't, call them the favorite necessarily in a lot of, division series here, especially as we kind of, get into a situation where you might be facing a team like the Dodgers, who are dealing with some injuries to their pitching staff, but still you're talking about a much better lineup there. But either way, the Brewers do have a chance against any opponent they go up against right now, even if they're not the favorites. So I think that's kind of the glass half full look that you can take at it.
I think if you were to tell me, well, the Brewers offense is going to come to play or not come to play in the postseason, I would say not come, because more times than not, and I'm not being negative here, but yeah, the Brewers offense is consistent. You don't know what his offense is going to show up. More than likely, it's an offense that's not going to click. That is my fear with these guys, that the offense is going to come out there and, put up one or two runs and put all the pressure on the pitching staff like it's been most of the season.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about, not knowing which offense is going to show up, this is something that I did a piece on a few weeks ago. The difference between the good offense and the bad offense, so to speak, it's not really as great of a difference as you might think based on, having these games where they're just seemingly being overpowered and shut down versus these games where they're kind of exploding and putting up a lot of runs. Really, one thing that's been pretty constant, win or lose, has been that they don't drive the ball a whole lot and they hit a lot of balls on the ground. And that's really probably their biggest weakness. Really, since that series where they got swept in LA by the Dodgers, they've been pretty consistent with working pitches on walks, putting the ball in play even. But another thing that's been consistent too is they're not necessarily driving the ball a whole lot. They'll have some games here and there where, you have a couple guys who get into one. Carlos Santana's hit for a little bit of power. Mark Canha's had some big home runs. But you look up and down this lineup, they don't really have a lot of guys who consistently drive the ball. If you get, Willie Adames hot and get him on kind of a homer spree, he could be someone who could kind of fill that role as a power bat. But they just don't have a lot of guys top to bottom who drive the ball. So when they're having these games where they're scoring a lot of runs, a lot of times it's because they're stringing singles together, on some ground balls that are getting through the hole, maybe some soft line drives that they're dropping down the line. And I don't think that's representative of a team that actually has a consistent skill of doing that. I think a lot of it is just, a little bit up to fate, so to speak, and kind of up to what the baseball gods are deciding that day. So when you do have an offense like that that's going into the playoffs, I mean, it's pretty well documented. You can look at the numbers. The teams that slug in the playoffs are the teams that score in the playoffs, especially when you're facing a lot of really good pitching staffs. And this Brewers team, they really haven't slugged a whole lot, even when they've been winning a lot of games. So that's my concern for them right now. I think there's a very good chance that, if you get into the playoffs, the offense that you've seen, for the better part of the second half here is probably what you're going to see in the playoffs. But there's a wide range of outcomes there just based on, what kind of luck the Brewers are having when they're putting these balls in play that they're not necessarily hitting very hard. So there is kind of a lot of space there and a lot of different outcomes that could come out of that. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where that leads the Brewers when they get into the playoffs. Are they going to have these games where they're putting a lot of balls in play, but it's a lot of balls on the ground right at guys, and that's where a lot of those double plays come from? Or is it going to be you're kind of getting these balls to sneak through the holes and you're stringing together all these hits to put together rallies? Because it could very easily be one or the other.
That's Jack Stern from BrewCrewBall.com. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day, which is different than the philosophy of baseball. It's like wait around for the 3-run homer. They got it from Carlos on Saturday to tie that game. But, the Brewers have been built over, for a few years now of, sit back. Let's not bunt. Let's not go for the base hit. Let's not get them on, get them over, get them in. which I like that way of playing, but sit back and wait for somebody to hit the 3-run bomb.
Yeah, I mean, I'm new school, so I'm going to tell you that, if there's a more efficient, consistent way to score, it's going to be you have a lot of guys who can hit those 3-run bombs. I mean, it's a lot easier to drive in a bunch of runs on one swing than it is to have to string together a bunch of hits up and down the lineup and then try to get that guy in. But again, this is a Brewers team that just doesn't really have that firepower. So, if they're going to try to rely on a lot of home runs without having a lot of power bats, that's not going to work very well for them. So I think that is kind of why you're seeing a little bit of a shift here. Maybe not necessarily because it's the preferred approach to be playing small ball all the time, but I think it's just kind of a product of the kind of bats that the Brewers have in this lineup right now. They don't have a lot of power hitters, so they are going to have to kind of default to, we're just going to try to have some pesky at-bats, work counts, and then hope that, we kind of get those breaks where we're getting the right balls falling in for hits and stringing together those hits and just getting guys on base, working pitch counts, seeing a lot of pitches and seeing a lot of pitchers too, getting starters out of games early. That's how they're going to beat you. Whether that's going to be a successful strategy, I'm not especially confident, but that's what they're trying to do.
Jack, hang on one second. Got to tell you about DoorDash right now. DoorDash, you're missing the syrup for your pancakes, or you ran out of your favorite coffee creamer. With DoorDash grocery delivery, you can get what you want when you want it. Love the convenience of getting what you want right at your door. DoorDash grocery delivery. You can stock up for the week or order last-minute cravings conveniently. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order, up to a $20 value, when you use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB at checkout. Limited time offer. Terms apply. 50% off to up to a $20 no minimal subtotal, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code Locked On MLB. Don't forget, that's Locked On MLB, 50% off your first order with DoorDash. Thousands of groceries stores to choose from. You'll find the best in your neighborhood. Boost your local economy with each and every order, and you'll get exactly what you ordered. Don't make it right. Sit back and enjoy the quality groceries just like you picked up them for yourself. Go to DoorDash today. Again, use that promo code Locked On MLB at checkout. Limited time offer. Terms apply. Chuck Freeman here, Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. We're talking with Jack Stern from BrewCrewBall.com. Find us on Google, Spotify, Apple, all the major downloads, and of course on YouTube. Go to Locked On Brewers on YouTube. Search Locked On Brewers. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell. It'll let you every time we drop an episode here on Locked On Brewers. Thank you, all you everydayers, for following me along. I read your comments every day on YouTube and, of course, on Twitter, Chuck Freeman, FREIMUND. And also follow Jack Stern. He's great on Twitter. Go to by Jack Stern, and you will get all his comments and, of course, read his stuff on BrewCrewBall.com. All right, Jack, odd move that the Brewers made. Brian Anderson has been with this team all season, participated in the clinching. Yeah, he was disappointed that he has not had a big role here since like late July. But then they release him and they designate him for assignment and to add Garrett Mitchell. Talk about what you think about the move with, releasing him for the most part. Brian Anderson, a guy who's been here for 95% of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it was a guy who very clearly did not have a role on this roster for the better part of a month now. Just was not getting a lot of playing time after he came back from that back injury. Andrew Monasterio had stepped up at third base, and then with the acquisition of Josh Donaldson, even someone like Tyrone Taylor doing a nice job in the outfield too, as he kind of recovered from that elbow injury. Just was not a lot of playing time for Brian Anderson, and it created this really odd situation where not only was he not starting games, he just wasn't playing at all. And that, I think, was what was really surprising, because I think you could have at least made the case for using him as like a defensive replacement at third base for Monasterio late in some games, because I do think Anderson's a better third baseman than Monasterio is. But it finally got to a point now where the Brewers just decided they were not going to keep him on the roster any longer. It was a weird situation to have a guy taking up a spot and basically not playing at all, especially because Craig Counsell has historically always been a guy who has gotten as much value as he can out of all 26 spots on his roster. So to see Anderson just not getting a chance to contribute at all was a little bit odd. But now it finally got to a point where I think the Brewers are kind of in decision mode now with Garrett Mitchell. He's healthy. He's ready to play in big league games again. The AAA season is over, so his rehab assignment expired at Nashville. And they're in a spot now, again, where they've locked up the division. So these are not the most meaningful games right now. This is kind of a chance for Mitchell to get a little bit of a trial run, try to reacclimate himself to big league baseball again. And that's going to determine for the Brewers whether or not they think it's worth putting him on a playoff roster as like a pinch runner, a defensive replacement, maybe even a guy who could pinch hit once in a while. It would be a pretty limited role, but it's, again, a situation where the Brewers just need to see him play some big league games, see what he's got, and see if he can contribute in the playoffs. And Brian Anderson was the obvious move there, to bring Mitchell back to the active roster for a guy who's basically never playing. It makes sense. I think the biggest surprise really is just that it took this long for the Brewers to cut bait with Brian Anderson, given that it had been pretty obvious that, there was no spot for him on this team. I don't know if they were holding out just in case there was an injury or something, just trying to preserve that depth. But it was a little strange to see it take this long before Anderson finally lost his spot, just given how there was no playing time for him.
Yeah, I think what happened there, Jack, is they probably wanted to see how Mitchell was coming along, and they feel confident because he's working out with the team in Milwaukee. They feel confident enough that they're going to put him obviously on the 26 man when that comes out later on this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a role where a guy like Garrett Mitchell can help out, just giving you some better defense in the outfield late in games, having you a left-handed bat off the bench, pinch runner. There are multiple different ways that he can help this team, especially with the kind of brand of baseball that he plays. I don't know how much of an impact you can expect him to make with the bat, but just the speed and defense are where there's definitely a reason to give him a look, and that's what they're doing right now. So depending on what we see over the next couple of days here from him, we could see him on that playoff roster when we get to the wild card series.
Who do you think is going to end up on the cutting room floor of the 26 man? Who's not going to make it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think obviously there's probably going to be a couple guys, like on the back end of that bullpen who probably aren't going to be making the cut. Guys like Colin Ray, Julio Tehran, some guys who there's probably just not going to be a lot of innings for them on that playoff roster. I think that those guys will be pretty good candidates to get the cut. My guess is they are still going to try to maximize carrying some guys on the bench, position players. So I think we are going to see them try to keep a little bit more depth there, just, for substitutions in case something happens, whatever. Craig Counsell's a guy, again, who likes to be pretty flexible with that lineup and, using pinch hitters to play the platoon advantage late in games. So I think he's going to want to have more flexibility there than he is with his pitching staff in the bullpen in a shorter series. So I think the guys who are going to be on the chopping block are going to be those guys, in the bullpen, kind of, back end of the rotation, guys who probably just are not going to get innings in that series. Those are probably going to be the guys who don't make that initial playoff roster.
I wonder if Blake Perkins still might make this 26-man roster. Defense replacement, maybe pinch runner. I looked at Anderson as being one of those guys, he's listed as an infielder, but he can play outfield, just maybe a defensive replacement as well, as we talked about. But I wonder if Perkins is going to make this 26-man.
I'm hoping he does. I think that there's definitely a spot for him to contribute. Blake Perkins is a guy I really like. Switch hitter, provides some versatility. Really, really good with the glove at all three outfield positions. I don't think he's gotten enough love for that just because he hasn't played a whole lot this year with the big league team. But he has arguably been one of the best defensive outfielders in the sport this year. So just having a guy that can do that, and again, gives you some flexibility as a bat, as a switch hitter. And I think he's a guy who, if he were to get a little bit more playing time in the future, could be a breakout candidate down the line. Probably not going to be the case in October, but definitely a guy who can help them out in that kind of spot. And that might be, the kind of decision that the Brewers are weighing right now. Like, do you want to roster, both Garrett Mitchell and Blake Perkins on a playoff roster? That's going to be an interesting decision that they have to make.
I think as far as pitching is concerned, I see Adrian Hauser moving to the bullpen in long relief. And I'm wondering if they would go with a 3-man if they look at this and even use Miley, if necessary, in one of these wild card games as a guy coming out of the bullpen, if they would possibly do that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the way they approach it. I mean, obviously, you're going to try to line up Burns, Woodruff, Peralta, most likely in that order for those 3 games. Hope that you can win it in 2, and then you can save Peralta. But I definitely think that we're probably going to see one of those starters end up in the bullpen, whether that's going to be Miley or Hauser. That kind of remains to be seen, and that might depend on the matchup a little bit. My guess is that they're probably pretty comparable in Craig Counsell's eyes. I know that Miley's got some of the better surface level stats with the ERA, but these are both guys who are going to pitch to contact. They're not going to strike guys out. They are going to walk a decent amount of guys too, even for guys who are supposed to be better control pitchers, and they're probably not going to be allowed to face a batting order a third time through. just different things of that nature. So my guess is that those guys probably will be counted on in more limited roles than they were during the regular season. So definitely, a bullpen role, maybe where you try to get those guys one time through the order or something, just to provide a little bit more flexibility in that bullpen. That seems like a role that someone like Miley or Hauser could fill.
And I'm sure Craig is going to have something up his sleeve like he did in 2018. He'll do a few unconventional things, I'm sure, if they get by. I mean, maybe in the wild card round, probably against the Dodgers. He played a couple of mind games with them in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if you asked him, he's probably hoping that he can just play this pretty straight and roll his horses out there, roll his best lineup out there and see what happens. But this is a guy who is very meticulous. That he's going to be paying attention, looking for any opportunity where he can get an advantage. And if that opportunity presents itself, I'm sure that he's going to be prepared. He's going to make sure that all of his players are prepared to do whatever it takes, because that's what you got to do sometimes, especially as a small market team where, on paper, you might not always line up with the team that you're facing as the favorite in that series. So you got to do whatever you can to get an advantage. And I'm sure Craig Counsell is going to be looking to do that. The question is just going to be kind of, how does the series play out, and does that opportunity present itself?
All right, Jack, hang on. We got one more segment to do. Just want to tell you right now about Sleeper. If you like fantasy sports and you like fantasy baseball, and of course the NFL season is here, fantasy is the way to go on Sleeper. MLB playoffs are coming up next week, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to win 100 times your cash on daily fantasy baseball. It's been never more exciting with all the great stars in the game as there are right now. Pick more or less on stats for these stars like home runs, hits, strikeouts, triples, doubles, you name it. More than up to 8 different players scenarios you could take for 100 times the payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big. And here's what you need to do. Go to Locked On, use the promo code. First of all, you go to Sleeper, use the promo code Locked On, and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details, and you see the Sleeper logo and the account right on my YouTube page, right there, as you're seeing at the bottom of the crawl there. Deposit, and you'll see the match code and all that. Use the Locked On. Go to that website. Go to Locked On. Again, you'll get a $100 match in your first deposit. And hey, if you're a fantasy expert and you think matchups, and you maybe here this weekend you want to try it out, go ahead and do it. And you got football on there as well. But you're going to have a chance to win big, and you can't pass up the $100 match in your first deposit. Go to Sleeper today and take part in the MLB playoffs. Chuck Freeman, the Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. Chuck Freeman, along with Jack Stearns here on Brew Crew Ball. Find me on Google, Spotify, Apple, all the major downloads right now for Locked On Brewers. And of course, go to YouTube, go to Locked On Brewers on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, and we'll alert you every time we drop an episode here on Locked On Brewers. I asked this of our guest the other day, and I'm going to ask you, are you concerned that the velo from Woodruff first and then Piamps down a little bit in recent weeks? Well, the other day for Woodruff, last Saturday.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to be overly concerned yet, just because it was one start. I think if it kind of gets to a point where this is a trend now, we're going to see him pitch, obviously, this weekend against the Cubs. So we'll see how he looks when he makes that last start. But again, it's just one outing. I'm not going to get too alarmed by anything I saw in one outing. And just, he's had kind of an odd season as far as his timeline goes, just because he ramped all the way up, went into opening day 100%, got hurt after his second start already, missed 4 months, and basically had to do the entire ramp up process again. So he's pitching, in September right now, but this is really like his first full month of action again. So it's kind of like he's on a weird timeline here. So you never know if there could be, kind of just a dead arm thing that he's going through right now, and that'll just kind of take like a week to resolve itself. You never really know. So I'm not going to get too worried by one start. We'll see how he looks his next time out. If it was a concern for the Brewers, I'm sure that, they kind of know how to handle it and how to keep him in good health. As far as a guy like Piamps goes, it is a little bit concerning to see him down, just when you talk about the workload that he's had to shoulder this year. He's been a guy who, historically, throughout his career, it's not so much the innings that I'm worried about, because he has been kind of a multi-inning middle reliever in the past. What I'm worried about more is that by transitioning into being a bona fide setup guy, he's now been on a schedule where he's throwing roughly the same amount of innings. He is on pace for a career high in innings just because he's pitched so much. But that's a bigger thing. He's pitching a lot, and he's pitching, very regularly, multiple times a week, just having to be used in that high leverage role for a team that plays a lot of close games. So I do think it is something the Brewers have to monitor. He looked okay last night when he pitched on Wednesday against the Cardinals. He threw a pretty clean inning there, and the command just looked a lot better. So just getting him the opportunity to throw then, and then I think you try to get him one more regular season outing, make sure he looks good to get to the playoffs. But they are going to have to monitor the health and the workload of Yoel Payamps, because if it does get to a point where he's just starting to run out of gas, that might have to change, kind of the outlook of this high leverage bullpen.
Jack, this is going to be released on Friday, but as of you and I taping this, Arizona's got a 1.5 game lead up on top of the second wild card spot. I'm convinced I don't want any piece of their top 2 starters, especially Zach Gallen. Chicago, Miami, Cincinnati. The Brewers obviously could factor in with the Cubs this weekend. I want no part of Arizona. I'm good with any of those other 3 teams. Maybe Miami it scares me a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, really the 2 teams that I don't want to face right now are Arizona, for the reason you said, talking about those top 2 arms. I don't really want to face the Cubs either in a wild card series. Whether or not they're able to roll out Justin Steele in this series is going to depend on how they line their starters up this weekend. But if there is a potential to face, like Marcus Stroman and Justin Steele as your top 2 arms that you're going up against in a 3-game series, that scares me a little bit. Cubs do have a better lineup than the Brewers, I believe, just based on what I've seen from these 2 teams. And I think that's a pretty even matchup then for those 2. So Diamondbacks and Cubs are definitely 2 teams that could easily take down the Brewers. If it were up to me, I'd like to play Miami, just because it's kind of an inconsistent lineup and they're dealing with a lot of injuries to that starting staff. So you got a chance to beat them in a 3-game series.
Then, Jack, how would you feel if it went down to Sunday, October 1st, the 5-year anniversary? I'm showing Jack a program of game 163 in Chicago. Sunday is the 5-year anniversary already of the Brewers winning game 163, eliminating the Cubs on that final day when the Brewers have nothing to play for, a watered down lineup possibly, and finishing off the Cubs on the anniversary, the 5-year anniversary of game 163 in Chicago.
It would definitely be a contrast to what we saw 5 years ago, where, it's kind of not a winner take all game, but it's a winner takes the division game. Now this year, the Brewers have wrapped it up pretty easily, a lot less stress involved than I was expecting, which is always nice. So I think, you just take it any way you can get it. If you got to do it the hard way, like the Brewers did 5 years ago, go out, play the cards you're dealt, get the job done. Brewers are in a much better situation this time around, where they can afford to take it easy a little bit. And, not stop being competitive, but at least, there's not a whole lot of stakes on this series because they've wrapped up that division already. So just kind of fun to play that comparison game, just to see, the different ways that the Brewers have had to get into the postseason over the years. That's just kind of what you got to do. That's what good organizations do. Just put yourself in a position where you can get in and then do what it takes. And that's something that the Brewers have done in this era of Brewers baseball.
Find his great work, brewcrewball.com. Jack Stern joining us here on Locked On Brewers. Jack, thanks for carving out some time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Jack Stern, Locked On Brewers. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers. Jack Stern, brewcrewball.com. Thanks you everybody for joining us. Again, follow us along Google, Spotify, Apple, all the major downloads. Go to YouTube and find us on there. Go to Locked On Brewers, hit the promo or hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, and alert you every time we drop an episode here on Locked On Brewers. Have a great weekend. And of course, we'll be coming back at you on Sunday night and playoff preview. Our first game will be on Tuesday, but we're getting after it already on Sunday night and talk about that first matchup in the wild card round. Chuck Freeman, Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. Have yourself a great weekend, everybody.